Hi, I'm Morissa Schochet, and I'm going to talk about the Blue Revolution and the future of salmon. So, to provide an overview of what this presentation will cover, we will start by discussing the proliferation of salmon among the world. Next, I will discuss the nutritional benefits of salmon and why it's such a popular and healthy dish. After, I will talk about the differences between farmed and wild salmon to get an introduction to where this relationship between salmon nutrition and obesity-related factors occurs. After, we will explore the problem a little further when discussing the negative health effects, disease, and contamination. Finally, I want to introduce the future of salmon and discuss how this may affect our health. So what interested me in this topic was a recent article and a string of articles I read in the Scientific American. These articles talked about genetically engineered salmon that have finally become approved for sale. Though they're only sold in Canada currently, and the US has yet to sell them, I began to wonder about the effects this would have on the salmon population and nutritional benefits. Ultimately, I hope that this presentation will provide some interesting insight into the nutrition and evolution of salmon, since it is one of the most popular fish in the world. So, just as I mentioned, salmon is very popular around the world. This is evidenced by the abundance of salmon in all different forms, from poke, sushi, salmon fillets, or even lox on top of a bagel. And if you aren't hungry right now, you're probably lying. Salmon is definitely an important food item for Americans. In fact, it's one of the top 3 most popular seafood dishes and largely sought after food for Americans in supermarkets and restaurants. In fact, according to the annual Fisheries of the United States report, Americans increased their food consumption to 15.5 pounds of fish and shellfish per person in 2015. This is up nearly a pound from the previous year, making it the biggest leap in seafood consumption in 20 years. This makes sense since it makes the US the second largest consumer of seafood after China and just before Japan. And all of this stems from continuous growth in per capita fish consumption in higher income countries. With a growing population of older, wealthier, and more educated and more health conscious people, the demand for fish, especially salmon, has soared. All of this leads to pressure on the salmon population. So now, we're going to look at some of the nutritional benefits and what makes salmon so popular. The health benefits of salmon should not be understated. First, salmon is one of the best sources of the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids EPA and DHA. Unlike most other fats, omega-3 fats are considered essential, which means that you must get them from your diet since they can't be created by the body. Omega-3 fatty acids have been shown to reduce inflammation, lower blood pressure, and improve cardiovascular health. Additionally, salmon is a great source of protein. As we know, protein is an essential nutrient that must be gained from the diet as well. It helps the body heal after an injury, protects bone health, and maintains muscle mass during weight loss and aging. Another benefit is that salmon is high in B vitamins. These vitamins are involved in several important processes in your body, including turning the food you eat into energy, creating and repairing DNA, and reducing inflammation that can lead to heart disease. In short, B vitamins can help protect your heart and brain health, which is where the brain food reference comes in. Growing up, I was always told to eat salmon because it was brain food and it would make me smarter. And there's some truth to that. Well, some of it. These are just a few of the many nutritional benefits that salmon can give us, and it explains a major reason why people want to eat it and why we want more and more of it. But it has to come from somewhere. So, in looking at our major suppliers of salmon, we look to Norway, Chile, Canada, and Scotland, with Norway being the world leader. In fact, in Norway, in 2016, around 1.2 million metric tons were produced. And this is especially interesting because in the United States, 91% of the seafood we eat is imported. Not only does this create an 11.2 billion annual trade deficit, but it makes us reliant on other countries because we do not have a supply of our own. So, fish farming is how a lot of the salmon is grown today. And fish farming is part of a practice called aquaculture, which consists of cultivating freshwater or seawater populations under controlled conditions in these pen-like cages in the water. Aquaculture is in such high demand that it now provides 70% of the global salmon market. And for reference, this is 2.4 million metric tons. In 2013, the United States, which is the largest market for farmed salmon, consumed 353,000 tons of fish. So looking at some differences between wild salmon and farm salmon contains more fat, anywhere from 14 to 34% fat, where wild salmon only contains 5 to 7% fat. If you look at the picture, you can see the thick white striations in the farm salmon are fat, which really aren't present in the wild salmon. Next, farm salmon contains much more omega-6 than omega-3, and this is unhealthy given that most people are deficient in omega-3 but have way too much omega-6 than they need since it's in junk food. And another difference is that farm salmon is typically gray, but a synthetic pigment is added to copy the real pigment that wild salmon eat in nature. So farm salmon can give us a lot of disease and contamination because of the close quarters that these salmon are in. It can cause a lot of controversy due to conditions they're kept in and their ability to pose a more direct toxic threat to our health. Although fish are always considered healthy food, recent food testing reveals that today's farm salmon is one of the most toxic foods in the world. This toxicity is due to a variety of factors. First, below the hundreds of salmon farms along the Norwegian fjords is a layer of waste around 50 feet deep. This waste is full of bacteria, drugs, and toxic pesticides that leads into the open water aquacultures. The heavy nutrient muck can lead to noxious algae blooms, one of which killed at least 27 million salmon raised in Chile last March. Additionally, the extent and spread of sea lice has taken a toll on farm salmon as well as wild salmon. Sea lice are these small parasitic creatures that latch onto adolescent salmon and feed on their skin. These lice can lay thousands of eggs and kill the salmon. And if they survive, they could contaminate it. And so how does this relate to diabetes and obesity? Well, in animal feeding studies, mice-fed farm salmon developed obesity and diabetes, and researchers believe that these effects were due to toxic exposures in farm salmon. In a recent rat study that looked at farm salmon to see if it had a link to diabetes, all of the rats were either fed one of high 3-fat diets or a control diet of regular rat chow. One of the high-fat diets had corn oil added, the other one had Atlantic salmon oil added, and the third had Atlantic salmon oil added with the toxicants removed. As a result, the rat supplements with the non-purified Atlantic salmon oil gained weight, became insulin resistant, and developed fatty liver disease. The other rats did not. In another study, mice were fed one of several different diets for 8 weeks and monitored their health outcome in relation to weight and blood sugar control. Those mice fed the contaminated salmon fillets developed exaggerated insulin resistance, visceral obesity, and glucose intolerance. They also experienced a reduction in muscle glucose uptake in response to insulin. The mice fed the high-fat diet without toxins did not have these adverse health effects. And while these studies don't necessarily confirm anything, they do make us question what kind of contamination resides within farm salmon and how it relates to consuming unhealthy fats. So now, to look towards the future, genetically modified salmon. U.S. firm AquaBounty Technologies has recently released the genetically engineered salmon to market. The fish, a variety of Atlantic salmon, Salma salar, is engineered to grow faster than its non-genetically modified counterpart, reaching market size in roughly half the time, about 18 months in comparison to 30 months. This sale marks the first time in history that a genetically engineered animal has been sold for food on the open market. And what revolutionizes the salmon industry is the fact that these AquaBounty salmon are grown in tanks that don't encounter many of the pathogens and parasites that affect salmon raised in sea cages. That's right, they can be grown on land and contain tanks, making them automatically certified for consumption. And this is pretty interesting given that we've reached our biological roof with the amount of fish we can naturally harvest. However, as with most genetically modified foods, there's controversy. The Center for Food Safety, an environmental advocacy group in Washington, D.C., sued the FDA last year in an attempt to overturn its salmon decision. The group says that the agency lacks the legal authority to oversee the genetically engineered animals and should consider the environmental risks. Will these eradicate the wild population of salmon? And what are the health effects of the people eating it? And while this is so new that there's more data continuing to come out, it's predicted that within the next year or two, the GM salmon will revolutionize the way salmon is grown and delivered. The U.S. won't have to rely on other countries to supply its salmon. It's a scary future, but hopefully it will be much better for our health than the farm salmon that we're currently eating. So why should we care? Well, Salmon popularity is skyrocketing. It's becoming one of the most popular fish in the world in both developed and less developed countries. The strain on demand and supply is overwhelming, and we need to look for solutions. And since salmon is very healthy, and we believe it's very healthy, we want to ensure that it is very healthy, and we should have the right to know what we're actually eating. So, thank you.